So we'll be going over to our reporters in just a bit to understand if the situation has changed in the last 24 hours. But here's what you need to understand, viewers. Let's talk about the LPG supply worry and why there is, in a sense, an alarm in India as well over the same. Why the alarm? India imports 62% of its LPG requirement. And remember, a major chunk of this comes in through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, why the government says do not panic? Because they're expanding crude suppliers from 27 to 40 nations. So 27 countries, in fact, were engaged in supplying crude to India earlier. And now that number has reached 40s. Why the government is saying more efforts are being made to expand on our energy resources. Why the alarm? Large share of LPG imports from the Middle East. Like I said, the Strait of Hormuz and its closure becomes, or rather holds the key here. And why the government says do not panic? 70% of imports via routes outside of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this could typically take a few more days, 15 to 20 days, vis-a-vis the Strait of Hormuz or the direct access to the Middle East. This, remember, these imports typically reach India within 4 to 5 days. So there's a little bit of a wait here, but nonetheless, there are alternatives in place. Why the alarm? The Strait of Hormuz is a key choke point. 1/5 of global crude oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. For our LPG as well, there's heavy reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. The government, though, says there are reserves and buffers to cushion short-term disruptions. We need not worry for the next few days, is the assurance, repeated assurance that is coming in from the government. Also, there are concerns on early supply tightness for restaurants. Remember, hotel industry, hoteliers are the first to have reacted or spoken vocally about the concerns. They've also come up with a revision in their menus. There are different measures that are being adopted by them, especially in cities like Bengaluru and Pune. But the government says household supply is being prioritized over commercial use. And to understand or how to curtail or beat this challenge, the LPG challenge in the moment, the government has also passed a few directives on what the hotel industry must do. There's also concerns around emergency measures, and they suggest there is stress in the system. The story, remember, boils down to how we need to focus on domestic production going forward and also expand on our storage. And that is a lesson in learning. But the government says refineries will be boosting LPG output and will redirect supply as well. That we still have time at hand and we are coming up with alternatives, that we have a contingency plan in place. LPG prices already up, which is reflecting volatility. Now, we've seen a lot of panic buying is already happening, as a result of which prices have gone up too, apart from, of course, the global supply disruptions. But the government has spoken of rules and how they're adjusted to prevent hoarding and panic buying, which also explains the constant reminders that are coming in from the top. So the petroleum minister also speaking of how people need not worry. I do want to go across to CNN News 18's Pallavi Ghosh joining us with more details. Apart from all these measures, assurances coming in from the government, Pallavi, Essential Commodities Act has also been invoked. So tell us about the key takeaways there and what's the first most relief that we must talk about.
Essential Commodities Act, according to government sources, is not something which he has to be alarmed about. See, there's a difference between crude oil procurement and LPG procurement. First of all, our crude oil comes in from at least 40 countries, and the routes other than the Strait of Hormuz are being used. So therefore, as far as crude oil goes, and also because the crude oil prices are falling worldwide over because of multiple measures, whether it's the G7, whether it's Donald Trump's statements, that's not something which the government is worried about. The government is a little apprehensive, I would say, and worried also as far as LPG goes, because 85 to 90% of the LPG supplies actually comes in from the Gulf region. Second is, yes, there's talks to look in for alternative countries where we can procure it, but that's going to take some time, Christine. It's not going to happen overnight in 2 to 3 days. So we have a limited amount of supply that the government claims that it's lasting up to 25 to 30 days. What the government is worried about is that people may go into panic mode and start hoarding. And therefore, this rationalization and regularization is to be required. One, domestic users will get the priority, even among the commercial users, which is different. For example, for a layman, while we all use a red cylinder, the commercial users use a blue cylinder. So there also, they have been given priority segments, which is like, say, hospitals, ambulance, so on and so forth. But most importantly, what happens is that even among them is the hotel industry. For them, a 3-member committee has been set up. The committee members can be approached. by the hotel and restaurant industries, and they can always be told that, okay, look, you can go ahead. This is our concern. Let's procure it. I think the government is, as a precautionary measure, is going in for regularization. They do not want to call it rationing, but you know what is happening. There is a panic mode which has taken place, and because of the panic mode, you are seeing that kind of reactions on the ground.
NRA has also issued advisory. We'll break down all those details in just a bit. Pallavi, stay on with us. Across cities, the public is panicking. Queues from outside LPG agencies. Many consumers clutching empty cylinders in frustration. At the same time, what we're also seeing is prices are rising. So prices are rising. The cost of domestic LPG cylinders also up by 60 rupees. Commercial cylinders have jumped to 115 rupees. Now that's a big jump in itself. The business sector is also feeling the pinch. Restaurants, like we've been discussing, are reporting major disruptions in cooking gas supplies. Many say commercial LPG deliveries have largely stopped, and this has threatened normal operations and service. And they say if the disruptions are not worked upon, then expect losses in thousands of crores. Let's also talk about India's dependence on LPG. So it's important to zoom out a little, understand where we stand. India's dependence, or rather India depends heavily on imported LPG, which accounts for 67%. We just spoke of that figure a little while ago, 67% of total consumption. The country's total LPG consumption is 33.15 million metric tons, which serves about 32 or rather 33.2 crore consumers across households. That's the consumption level that we're looking at across households and businesses. Of these imports, 85 to 90% come from the Middle East. That's the reliance on all of Strait of Hormuz and all of Middle East, which again highlights the country's vulnerability to supply disruptions from the region. Now, much of the story, remember, lies in the heart of the Strait of Hormuz closure, and the 90% is indicative of why this is, or rather slowly turning out to be, a recurring problem here, is why this is also leading to a lot of panic and hoarding. I do want to bring in Pallavi Ghosh into the conversation once again. Pallavi, we've been breaking down the story here bit by bit to understand what's leading to the onset of this crisis. But the government says so far we're in a comfortable position. What is the number that the government is relying on? They're speaking of 100% uninterrupted supply of LPG, at least to domestic households, 70-80% to industries. The larger plan in place, numerically at least, what is it?
So, Christine, in terms of sheer numbers, for obvious reasons, the government is not going to put a number to it. And the reason, of course, is one, according to government sources, because they do not want a panic situation to be created. And second is the government saying that we are talking to many other countries. So the process is getting constantly replenished. So it's an ongoing process. But you know, because of the nature of the product, unlike crude oil, which is easily to be stored, and also there are 40 other countries where we get the procurement from, LPG, of course, and LNG does not face a similar kind of a situation. First of all, its storage is difficult. Second, the pipeline has to be established, which cannot be happening over time. You know what happens, to put it very simply, when you're looking for crude oil procurement or supply, there are cargoes of the ships which bring it, and then they go to a destination and then are stored in those huge tanks. That cannot be possible as far as the supply of the LPG or LNG is concerned. So if you're looking for new routes or new countries where you can source it from, where is the pipeline? You have to kind of build that pipeline. So that is where the problem will be. What the government is apprehensive is that we do not know how long this war is going to last. So because that is not known, the kind of uncertainty and scare regarding the LPG supplies is something, an area of concern, which is why the government is trying to go in for a preemptive measure and calling it regularization and rationalization.
And, reports from other parts of the country are further cementing those fears. So you have a lot of citizens dial you, send you messages and ask whether or not they should go buy more of these red cylinders. But that story continues because the government is closely monitoring the situation. Pallavi, many thanks for joining us with that detailed analysis. Politics also here in India continues over the LPG shortage concerns. Opposition has been going after the centre. They say that the central government is entirely responsible for this LPG shortage amid the ongoing conflict in West Asia. Let's also listen in to some reactions that have come in so far.
सरकार पूर्वानुमान लगाने में पूरी तरह अपने कर्तव्यों का पालन नहीं कर पाई, विफल रही। सबको मालूम था वेस्ट एशिया में युद्ध का संकट होने वाला है और केंद्र सरकार का ये निर्णय रहा है कि हम 45 दिन का रिजर्वायर रखेंगे। फिर ये नवरात्र के पहले, रमजान में, ईद के पहले ये मारामारी क्यों सिलेंडर की? मैं कुल मिला के कहना चाहता हूं, पूर्वानुमान लगाने में ये सरकार पूरी तरह विफल ही नहीं रही, ये मौके का फायदा उठा रही है।
कहां से लाएंगे गैस? मोदी जी के पास कुछ उसका विकल्प है? तो हमने ये सोचा है, मोदी जी बहुत बड़े शास्त्रज्ञ है, वैज्ञानिक है, साइंटिस्ट है। कुछ साल पहले मोदी जी ने एक संशोधन किया था कि नाले से गैस बनाएंगे। आपको याद होगा, तब सब लोगों ने उनकी चेष्टा की, हाँ, मजाक उड़ाया मोदी जी का, अरे क्या बोल रहे हैं, हम नाले से गैस पैदा करेंगे और घर घर में चूल्हे जलाएंगे। अब वो समय आया है मोदी जी का संशोधन एक्चुअल प्रैक्टिकली निर्माण करने का।
पहले तो ये यूनियन मिनिस्टर क्लैरिफाई कर दें, कॉमर्स मिनिस्टर, कि इनके कार्यक्षेत्र में है या नहीं है। तेल उनके कार्यक्षेत्र में नहीं आता है, ना वो खरीदते हैं, ना ही वो बेचते हैं, ना ही वो ट्रेडर है, ना ही उनका व्यापार है। और आप जाकर एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स मिनिस्ट्री से पूछिए। और अब यही कॉमर्स मिनिस्टर पेट्रोलियम मिनिस्टर को जो जवाब देना चाहिए वो अपने कार्यक्षेत्र में बता रहे हैं। यानी पूरी की पूरी सरकार जो है जुमलेबाज सरकार है। और अगर अब तेल उनके कार्यक्षेत्र में आ गया है तो अब जनता के मन में जो सवाल है कि क्या इंटरिम डील के लिए आपने ये कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ किया था, इंडिया के एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी को कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ किया था, जहां पे आपने कहा हाँ हम रशिया से तेल नहीं खरीदेंगे, जो डोनाल्ड ट्रंप बता रहे हैं, और वही अमेरिका बता रहा है कि उन्होंने 30 दिन के लिए हमारे देश को अलाउ किया है रशियन ऑयल खरीदने के लिए। तो अब वो इस जवाब से पहले जो ये दे रहे हैं, बड़ी बड़ी बातें कर रहे हैं, उससे पहले ये बताएं कि क्या हमने अपनी एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी नीड्स यूएस के हवाले कर दी हैं।